Hello and welcome. If you haven't already, I invite you to please click subscribe. There's no obligation, and it allows you to be notified of all new chapters. Additional information about the story, including the author, chapter warnings, and rating, can be found in the description below. All credit goes to the original author. All That Remains by Orphan Account, Chapter 26, Radagast's Secret. The hobbits in the Hidden Valley had long ago joined the fight, taking up arms with the same unshakable determination as their elven comrades. Some were wielding elven daggers as swords, others were using whatever they happened to pick up to defend themselves. Kitchen knives, fire pokers, and even a few pans were being used as weapons of war. Alone, the peaceful hobbits would have fallen quickly before the enemy's strength, but they were not alone. They fought together, with their kin and elves alike. As an elf locked blades with an orc, a small, unnoticeable hobbit would sneak in and deliver a blow, either killing or severely wounding their foe. The hobbits could not match the shadowed elves' speed and strength, but they did not need to. Instead, they defended themselves as well as they could, and assisted where they were needed without being ordered or asked. Hobbits, who had no standing army, who had never seen true war, who had lost so much to the darkness, fought against it with a bravery and strength few possessed. These were Elrohir's thoughts as war waged in the halls of healing, the enemy making it deep into the once safe last homely house. It was only him, his father, a few warriors, Bilbo Baggins, and 2 hobbits he did not know in the hall, defending the wounded as the orcs attempted to invade the room. Among the unconscious were Arister and Glorfindel, the latter's reason for unawareness known to the twin, but the former's still a mystery. There had been no time to exchange information or explain what had happened to one another. The orcs and shadowed elves had come too quickly for that. Thus the son of Elrond found himself standing just inside the door to the House of Healing with Bilbo and an elf he did not recognize. Valor, this one was not even a warrior, at his side, killing foe after foe as they tried to force their way inside. It was taxing, both physically and mentally, and Elrohir could only hope that he would last a while longer before his strength ran out. It was not the battle that was taking its toll on him, but the mental struggle that threatened to pull him under. He was changed. Mere hours ago, before all of this chaos began, he had been laughing and speaking with his 2 brothers when everything had become skewed. The world had shifted, a wave of darkness sweeping over it. The force and power of the evil that had appeared out of nowhere had overwhelmed Elrohir, forcing him into unconsciousness. And when he awoke, everything was different. He did not know how, he did not know why, but somehow his sixth sense, his ability to sense auras, had been heightened. Before, he had only had a vague sense of the presences around him, but now they were like voices screaming in his ears and lights blazing in his eyes. The auras of orcs, which had been mere whispers of warning trickling down his spine, were now clawed hands around his throat, choking him. The orcs' presences were overwhelming him, but even worse had been the auras of the shadowed elves. The shadowed elves. Even though they had left the Hidden Valley, leaving it for the orcs to finish off and retreating out of his heightened senses range, the memory of their presences plagued Elrohir like a physical illness. Their auras made him feel like he was trapped with a rotting corpse, unable to escape the terrible smell and horror of it. The shadowed elves felt like darkness, emptiness, disease, bloodlust, rage, all things associated with evil and death, promising nothing but suffering and pain. Elrohir, a warrior and proud son of Elrond, had wanted to curl up into a ball and sob like an elfling when he had first experienced the shadowed elves' rancid auras. Only the sense of the bright, blazing presence that a shadowed elf had been bearing down on had kept him from doing so. The instinct to protect the light presence from the rancid, evil, tainted aura had been enough for the twin to race to the source, only to find Glorfindel about to be murdered by Liffen. If he had not been able to sense that the Balrog Slayer was in danger... Well, the twin shook his head to clear it of thoughts on the past, focusing on killing orcs. He ignored his overpowered sixth sense as best he could, gripping his sword tightly in an attempt to keep himself in the physical world. It did not help that he could sense every vanishing presence, every death, and the terrible fading energy of the dying. He just had to last a little longer, just a little longer. He could not collapse again. He could not let the energies around him force him to leave consciousness behind. But it was just so much. Life and death swirled around him like a raging storm, pulling at his attention like an agonized scream. How did Esgal stand it? Elrohir blocked an orc's axe with his blade, and Bilbo stabbed it in the chest with the kitchen knife he was wielding like a sword. A carefully aimed arrow flew past the twin's head, hitting another invader in the eye. The elven warrior, Raynor, put another arrow to his bow, pulled back, released. Another orc died, but another arrow was used, the supply of projectiles rapidly diminishing. They could not even close the door, for the wood had been forced off its hinges by the first wave of attackers. The only thing that told Elrohir that the fighters outside had not perished was the bright, pure energies he could sense still fighting outside. Yet, even though their defense of this room was holding, the elf knew that they would not be able to last forever, and in here, they were essentially trapped. At least they were only fighting orcs now, not their shadowed kin. As he stabbed his sword into an enemy and jerked it free, pushing the dead creature back onto its allies, Elrohir felt a growing sense of unease. Why had the shadowed elves left? Why hadn't they remained to finish what they started? The elf fighting beside Elrohir cried out in pain as an orc's sword struck his shoulder. He fell back, leaving the twin and Bilbo alone, and the delicate balance they had been upholding shattered. The orcs surged forward, flooding into the halls of healing. Elrond was barely able to shout, "Protect the wounded!" before the harsh battle began. The dark-haired elf slashed at an orc, stabbed another, spun and lopped off a third's head. With quick, deadly movements he attacked, for there was no time to pause, not even for an instant. The enemies swarmed around them like a raging river, only constant movement keeping them alive. He thrust his blade into an orc's face, gave a hard diagonal slash to kill another foe. He struck with a booted foot, strong enough to snap an orc's leg with the blow, and cut it in half with a powerful sideways swipe. His senses were on fire, fear, protectiveness, and rage flooding his system. He hoped this new strength would last a while longer, but also knew it would not be long before he burned out completely. He spotted an orc approaching Glorfindel's bed, the defenders around him too busy to assess the helpless Balrog Slayer. With a savage curse, Elrohir sprang at the orc, blade held in both hands as he plunged it through the armor and into the orc's chest. He missed the heart, a mistake made obvious when the orc pulled itself off his blade, coming after the new threat. What, were they immune to pain now along with the sun? It was only when he spotted the special mark on the orc's armor. It was a berserker. Unaware of its pain, the berserker bellowed in rage, intent on its new target. Elrohir hastily blocked a blow and another, cursing himself for missing the kill strike that would have taken this dangerous enemy out. All warriors learned that killing berserkers instantly was essential. If you did not, they would attack with a single-minded bloodlust that put wargs to shame. Elrohir stabbed again, hitting the shoulder. No! He saw the berserker raising its sword in his peripheral vision and lashed out with his hand, hitting the creature solidly in the gap between its armor plates. It howled and dropped its sword, and Elrohir yanked his own blade free. With a cry, he beheaded the berserker, watching it fall with a relief. A moan made him turn in time to see Glorfindel sit up, look around with horrified bewilderment, before his bright blue eyes hardened. "Glorfindel!" Elrohir gasped. "Thank the valor you're away—" There was the sound of a sword plunging into flesh. Elrohir froze, eyes wide, as he felt blood spray over his back. The orc that had been sneaking up behind him died before he could strike, and before the elf could register that one of the evil presences around him was closer than was safe. As the orc fell, Glorfindel scowled at the orc blade he now wielded. There had been no extra elven blades within reach. His blue eyes transferred to Elrohir. "I'm all right. Keep fighting." And they did. Desperately they fought, somehow managing to survive, because even though the door was open and the enemy had come inside, the hall outside the Hall of Healing was thin and prevented large groups of enemies from invading all at once. Yet as more and more enemies came, Elrohir could only pray that his two brothers were still alive somewhere out there. One of the hobbits, not Bilbo, was killed, and an unconscious patient, not Aristor, was murdered as he lay oblivious to the world. Elrohir could not even track his father or any of his allies in the war zone the Halls of Healing had become. It was all too fast. Things were happening too fast. A sickening presence, more terrible and horrifying than even the shadowed elves, entered Elrohir's awareness. It crept over him like fire ants on his skin, making him shiver. Confusion overcame him as he stared at the empty spot that the dark aura was coming from. There was nothing there, yet it was coming from there, and it seemed to be getting stronger. The shadows moved, and Elrohir's breath hitched. He watched with wide eyes as the darkness rose, like a liquid, forming a humanoid shape. Out of the shadows, literally, stepped a black-cloaked figure. He did not need to sense the rotting, corpse-like presence he could clearly feel in order to know what had come to Imladris. It was a Nazgul. But that was not what made the elf's limbs freeze in terror. In the ring-wraith's hand was a torch, the yellow-green flames of dark fire flickering powerfully at the end of the dark material that kept it lit. In an eye blink, Elrohir knew the enemy's plan, why the shadowed elves had retreated, why the orcs were now fleeing, having spotted the ring-wraith as well. Without a word passing between them, the few elves and hobbits grabbed the wounded and fled the Halls of Healing, running for their very lives. Behind them, the Nazgul dropped the torch, and the dark fire roared into an inferno. "Arda! Arda!" Thranduil looked up from the document he had been browsing, smiling as his youngest son raced into his office. Seeing he had his father's attention, the 5-year-old clambered onto the Elven King's lap, looking at him with bright silver-blue eyes. "What do you need, little Greenleaf?" Thranduil questioned his son, who shifted and twitched with boundless energy. Legolas bounced excitedly, filled with the energy only the young could possess. "I have a question to ask you, Arda. It is very important." His attempted mature and serious tone was ruined when he grew interested in a knot in the Elven King's desk, poking it with a finger curiously. Thranduil's lips twitched as he watched his son. With Legolas, what could be considered important ranged from what they were having for dinner to a question about an interesting bug he had discovered in the garden. "All right, little leaf. What is your important question?" Legolas opened his mouth, closed it, and frowned. "I forgot it, Arda." The golden-haired elf chuckled and ruffled his son's hair, becoming more amused as the little one pouted in annoyance. "Don't worry about it, Eonin. You will remember eventually." The elfling paused, deep in thought, and brightened considerably. "Ada, Ada," he said, pulling at the Sindar's sleeve to make sure his father's attention remained on him. "I remember now, Ada." Thranduil hid his smile behind his hand. "Well, that was quick, wasn't it? Go on. Ask me your question." The elfling smiled and sat up as straight as he could, so he could speak into his father's ear. "Why did you give up on me, Ada?" he whispered. Thranduil froze, and when he looked down, his son was no longer in his arms. The Elven King looked around, frantic, and spotted Legolas standing in the doorway. The joy and smiles were gone from the elfling's face, and when he looked at his father, his silver-blue eyes were hard and cold. Legolas laughed, and there was no happiness in it. Instead, his laugh was empty and harsh. "Isn't it funny, Ada? I forgot my question earlier, just like you forgot me." Thranduil's hands began to shake, but he could not think of why. His son was in front of him. He was fine and safe. So why was a great feeling of horror and guilt clenching around the Sindar's heart? "No," the golden-haired elf croaked, standing up and reaching towards his son. "No, little leaf, I would never forget you." He blinked, and his son was gone once more. The king turned in a circle, panicking, then spotted him in the corner of the office this time. Legolas stood with his arms crossed, leaning casually against the wall in a way that did not fit the elfling's personality. Emotionless, silver-blue eyes glared at him. "Liar. You did forget me. You did give up on me. You left me in Dol Guldur." "No," Thranduil whispered, but his son ignored him. "You were told I was dead by an orc, and you believed it," the lost prince screamed. "And before then you did not even try to come and rescue me. I waited for you to save me every single night, but you never came. You never came. You abandoned me. You left me to pain and suffering and darkness." The Elven King could not speak, only able to mutely shake his head in denial. Silver-blue eyes that were too old for the young face they belonged to stared coldly at the Sindar, filled with rage and pain. "I hate you," the elfling whispered. "I hate you. I will never forgive you. I hate you, I hate you, I hate you." And that final shout was not spoken in the voice of a little elfling, but that of an angry, vengeful elf. Legolas sprang at him, seeming to grow into adulthood in an instant. But Thranduil could not tear his gaze away from his son's merciless, silver-blue eyes. His face became indistinct, his body vague and indecipherable. But as the lost prince halted just in front of the Elven King, Thranduil could not help but feel this shadowy elf was familiar. "Die," a flat, icy adult voice whispered in his ear, and a flicker of light off a knife blade caught his eye. Eyes filled with hatred and scorn, Legolas stabbed the Elven King in the chest, and Thranduil woke up screaming. Through his cries he could hear voices speaking to him, but at first he could not understand what they said. Confusion and terror made him struggle against the hands that held him down, screaming and desperate to escape the lingering presence of the nightmare. "My lord," a familiar voice was calling to him. "Thranduil, it is all right. You are among friends." Slowly, the words registered, and Thranduil's screams died in his throat. He opened his eyes to the halls of healing, breathing sharp and rapid even as he slowly calmed. The blurry shapes around the Elven King became focused, and he found Tolui, Nestor the healer, and Radagast to be leaning over him. The Sindar sat up, forcing them to retreat slightly, eyes roaming over the familiar hall, flicking over his fellow patients. His heartbeat sped up once more, panic again taking hold. "What happened?" he demanded, rising from his bed and striding to the one beside him. It contained Fael, and 5 others like his other children. All were unconscious or deeply asleep, their eyes closed and their skin pale. "They are all right, my lord," Nestor was quick to reassure the elf. "They merely collapsed when you did." "As I?" Memory slammed into Thranduil with the force of an elephant, and he remembered everything. The chant, the change in the forest, the void, the powerful darkness. Legolas. Legolas. "He's alive," Thranduil whispered. "He's alive." Tolui looked decidedly uncomfortable. "My lord, the lost prince is alive," Radagast said. 8 royals were needed to awaken the sanctuary of Mirkwood and complete the chant 8 royals did. "I cannot believe it," the Elven King said, still in shock. "After all this time, my youngest is alive." He remembered his dream, and his happiness dimmed. "We gave up on him. All this time he has been alone." His eyes roamed over his children, who he knew would be as joyful as he when they awoke, and paused on the 6th filled bed, one he had not noticed before. Again, concern became his primary emotion, and he hurried to the patient, placing a hand on his forehead. "Esgal?" The violet-eyed elf remained unmoving and unresponsive, even more pale and sickly-looking than the recovering royals. His breathing was steady but sharp, and his forehead was cool to the touch. "He is fine as well," Radagast told the Sindar. "I found him unconscious in the forest, almost dead. It is my belief that the rush of darkness caused by Iãgaw's coming, and the chance awakening of the sanctuary, affected Esgal greatly. The surge of darkness, then of light energy, hit him, one right after the other, overwhelming him and forcing him so deep within himself that he almost faded. Luckily, I found him in time to pull him back." Thranduil nodded absently, too shocked by the realization that Legolas was alive, and too concerned by his children and Esgal's states to truly listen to the Istar. Tolui, however, was being much more observant than his king. "Sanctuary? Iãgaw? Chance? What are you talking about, Iwendil?" the advisor wanted to know. The Elven King looked away from Esgal, eyes becoming alert, and a frown forming on his face. "I remember the chant, and I know that a great darkness called the Void has come to Middle-earth." Thranduil spotted a mixture of grief, worry, and heavy knowledge in the brown wizard's eyes. His frown deepened. "You know something. You know what has happened, and you know why. Iwendil." The Istar shifted on his feet, avoiding his eyes. He looked nervous and uncomfortable, but Thranduil refused to let his glare cease. "Iwendil, please," he said, half requesting, half demanding answers. "If you know anything about this threat and what has occurred, now is the time to share it." The brown wizard's gaze moved over the patients in the bed, before returning to the Elven King. "Yes, I suppose that now is the time." Something in the Istar changed then. A quiet grimness entered his visage. He suddenly seemed less goofy, more solemn and wise, looking more like a wizard than he ever had. For a moment, he just stood there in contemplative silence, brow furrowed and eyes dark. The 3 conscious elves around him waited patiently for him to speak. "Why was I sent to Middle-earth?" Radagast asked suddenly, not quite making it a question. He turned to look at Thranduil, eyes more intense than the Elven King had ever seen them. Why me? I am not the strongest Istari, nor the smartest or bravest. Other than Gandalf, Saruman, and the 2 blue wizards, there are many Istar that could have gone that would be more powerful than I, and would be better choices to assist in the fight against Sauron. I have done nothing large in the fight against Sauron, and am not capable of doing so. So why did Yavanna insist that I come along? Sensing that the questions were rhetorical, the elves remained silent. The brown wizard stepped forward, no longer goofy or scatterbrained, but calm and eerily grim. The truth is, Yavanna did not. I was sent here, not because of Yavanna, but because of Lorien. He was the one who told Yavanna to send me to Middle-earth, along with the others. Both knew that I loved the forest and the animals and would become attached to them, and also knew that I would be almost useless in the grand fight against Sauron. But that was the point. I was not sent here to fight Sauron. I was sent to Middle-earth to fight Iãgaw, although fight is not quite the right word. My mission was to set up defenses against the Void. You asked how I knew about him, the chant, and the sanctuary Mirkwood has become. I know because I helped lay down the magic and power that is now shielding your people. My purpose was to protect this small piece of Middle-earth from a monster that we were unsure even existed. Not even the other Istari knew of this. In fact, none had even heard of Iãgaw. None except me. I was chosen not for my power, not for my skills or mind, but because I loved Middle-earth. I was chosen because I was underestimated, unnoticeable, and few would believe that I had been tasked with setting up impenetrable defenses for a realm, to protect it from a demon that, if he was even real, was capable of obliterating everything. Yes, I know what Iãgaw is, what he wants, and a few of his powers. Everything Lorien knew about the coming of the Void and his powers he told me, so that I in turn could tell you if he ever awoke. And it was a large if, the Istar began to pace. The circumstances that would cause Iãgaw to be freed were so specific, the chances of him being released so minuscule, that I was sent merely to set up safeguards, and to not tell anyone about them or the Void. My purpose was to be here, just in case. Just in case Iãgaw did rise, and the sanctuary of Mirkwood was awakened. I do not know all Lorien knew about Iãgaw. A way to defeat him, if one exists, was kept from me. But I know enough to tell you what to expect, and why certain things have occurred. I can tell you why Mirkwood was chosen as the last sanctuary, why the royal family was able to awaken it with a chant, and why the shadowed trees are on your side. I know you can sense their new intent, yet have traits of darkness within them. Just like the circumstances for Iãgaw to be released were specific, so were the ones to create a sanctuary, one sanctuary, that would be able to defend against him. It required too much power and cooperation from the earth itself to create more than one sanctuary, so making one was what the Valor and I did. The first requirement was that it had to be an elven realm. Out of all the free people, the elves are the most light and magical, a bond with nature in their blood. Which brings me to the second requirement. The elves within the realm must love Middle-earth, and not long for the sea like their Noldor kin. They had to want to stay here, live here, and even die for this world. Another necessity for the chant to take hold was for the realm to not be protected by a ring of power. It had to be defended by its people's own strength, and its trees needed to know war, hardship, and darkness. For it is only something with an understanding of darkness that can truly defend against it. That is why I did not worry when the shadow fell over this land. When a body is struck by disease, it learns about the enemy inside it, casts it out, and when it tries to invade once more, the body can more easily defend. Sometimes it is even immune. The darkness within the shadowed trees is darkness, yet it is not. It is traces of a disease that is no longer harmful. It is like a whisper or disguise of a different type of darkness, like the natural, dormant darkness of night. It is not evil or connected to the void like all other darkness. It is merely there, a weapon and a shield for this realm and the trees. Radagast trailed off, mind far away. Thranduil looked into the wizard's piercing eyes, silently urging him to continue. He did. The last specific requirement to wake the power that now protects us, and the one that was the hardest to achieve, was your family, Elven King, the royal family. Your bonds with this land are greater than you know, much greater. Your line of kings dates back to the First Age. 8 elves of royal blood was the final requirement to awaken the sanctuary. 1 for the north, 1 for the east, 1 for the south, 1 for the west, 1 for the northeast, 1 for the northwest, 1 for the southeast, 1 for the southwest. 1 for each direction the chant must spread. Leave one out and the sanctuary would be incomplete, like an unfinished compass, a gaping hole left that would let the enemy through. Powers of Arda, hold back this darkness, protect this kingdom with tree, wind, water, stone. We feel the void, the devourer of Arda. We ask for sanctuary, protect our forest home. Arda, safeguard us, lend us your power, so when he seeks us he will not find. Hide us from the eyes that make most cower, and the reach of his evil blind. Air, protect us, shield us from his sight. Stone, remain our anchor, not our enemy. Trees, preserve us, and seal our borders tight. Water, defend us, lash out against all darkness you see. Arda, protect us, our people, souls, and light. He spoke in Westron, but echoes of power whispered through his voice. The words of that chant are powerful, each one chosen by Lorien himself to awaken the sanctuary. With this chant, Mirkwood is shielded from Iãgaw's sight. It is erased from the void's memories. None can even speak the woodland realm's name to him. Lorien and the Valar who believed in the threat of Iãgaw were very thorough in creating the sanctuary. If the void did exist and did become free, they wanted to be sure that there was a place of safety for the people he would terrorize. For many years after I arrived in this land, I was complacent, because in all that time there were only 7 royals. You and your 6 children made 7. For though Luaneth was your queen, she was not of royal blood. Then Legolas was born, and I realized that the circumstances that seemed so unreachable may not be as impossible as I presumed. Even when the lost prince was presumed dead, I did not lose vigilance again. I checked on the dormant powers that would awaken the sanctuary, checked to make sure that the moment Iãgaw escaped, that power would reach out to you. For if it did not, Iãgaw would find this place, and no land would be safe from his darkness. That did not come to be, thank the Valar. You, your children, and your connection to this world succeeded in making the woodland realm into a place that the void could never invade, and would not even remember. However, even dormant, the magic had effects on the land even before it was awakened. As you very well know, there are no shadowed elves within Mirkwood, not a single one, despite the loss, darkness, and horrors that plagued this realm. Even in a dormant state, the sanctuary protected the elves here, preventing the void from infecting them with darkness. The only shadowed elves here were ones that traveled here from other realms, for although the sleeping sanctuary could protect those that lived within it, It was not powerful enough in that state to eradicate the void from the shadowed elves. It is already too late for them now, so we will never know if the shadow would have been purged from them had the shadowed elves been in Mirkwood when the sanctuary awakened. Radagast settled into a chair at Esgal's bedside, looking at the unconscious elf as if he were not really seeing him. Before Lorien even began to tell me about his plans to place countermeasures against the void, he told me to never speak of Iãgaw, or my true mission to anyone. If any had learned about the sanctuary, or that demon, the results would have been disastrous. If things had gone the way many assumed that they would, Sauron would be the dark threat. The ring would have been destroyed and Iãgaw would be unable to get out of his prison. Then all information on him and the sanctuary would be unneeded and useless. So, like Lorien ordered me to, I stood by and said nothing and waited. But even I was unprepared when the Witch King awoke his true master. I, like all of you, assumed he was the servant of Sauron. I never even considered that Iãgaw was powerful enough where he was to break the Dark Lord's hold on his Nazgul. There was no time to take preventative measures or warn you about the inevitable rise of Iãgaw. I only knew what had happened when I felt the chant take hold of you and your Sylvan children. So here we are, at the beginning of the final battle, and perhaps the end of the world as we know it. The Istar fell silent, eyes not moving from Esgal's still form. He seemed to be watching the young elf breathe, as if he felt calmed by the slow, steady sign of life. "Indeed," Thranduil whispered, still trying to take it all in. Things were happening so quickly. Just the day before, his greatest worry had been Sauron rising. Now, instead of that, he had a worse darkness to face. His realm had become the only place that was safe from said darkness, and it turned out that his youngest son was alive. Thranduil swallowed hard. "Radagast, Lorien informed you of many things having to do with the void, and you have kept many secrets. You are deeply involved in the magic of the chant, and sensed when it awakened and changed this forest. You said you could feel the power of the chant take hold of us. Do you know where my son is?" As the last word left his mouth, a deafening silence fell over the room. The elf looked at the Istar, with an expression that was a wrenching mix of hope, fear, and pleading. "I'm sorry." Radagast did not look away from Esgal, eyes dark and distant. "I'm afraid that Prince Legolas Thranduilian remains lost."